Now I'll give you, just by example, U6. U6 counts these people, the ones that are unemployed in this definition, and it adds two other groups. Number one, the involuntarily part-time. These are people who say, I have a part-time job, but I want a full-time job, and I couldn't find one. Those people are considered to be part of the unemployed. So they're added to 06. And number three, the third group, I'm sorry, in this number, U6, are the people who answered the first question, I'm not working, but I'm not looking anymore. Those people are given a name in the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They are called, I kid you not, discouraged workers. They're discouraged. It's a very nice word. Think about it. They're discouraged. So the government, the BLS, will give you a number. For example, the people who are unemployed in the official statistic now, they number about 15 million. About 9.6%, roughly. The U6, that's them, plus the involuntary unemployed and the discouraged, those are 17.5%, 25 million, something like that. Well, if you ask me which is the unemployed number, well, I mean, yes, no, both, and many more that count other kinds of people as unemployed. People, for example, who say, I'm a student, but they have a follow-up question. Is it that you're a student because you want to get education or because you couldn't get a job? If you answer because I couldn't get a job, boom, you're considered unemployed. If you give a different, now we're getting into the subjective, motivations and mentality of a person's response, and there are people who quarrel with that. If you're interested in this stuff, there is a regular publication by the U.S. Department of Labor called the Monthly Labor Review, not to be confused with the Monthly Review, the Monthly Labor Review, and there you will see the statisticians debating in articles how unemployment should be counted, how unemployment should be measured, and so on. Now it gets even worse, because how the United States does it is different from how the Europeans. They don't count the same way. They look at it a little differently. It has to do with their traditions. For example, in a number of European countries, laws are established. So if the demand for a company's output drops, it is not allowed by law, or by contract with the union, or both. It's not allowed to just lay off people. It doesn't work like that. It must give the existing labor force fewer hours. In other words, unemployment is legally required to be shared by all the workers in an enterprise. The company cannot say, you're unemployed, you're unemployed. Everybody has 2 hours less a week. Everybody has 3 hours. That way, everybody has a job, but the unemployment is shared. You might think, heaven forbid, that an American union trying to build solidarity might demand such an arrangement. We don't allow some people to take it all, the pain, and other people not. That means everybody's going to try to be the one who gets the job and screw the people who don't. No, it's shared. That way everybody shares the pain. It might make everybody work a little harder not to let that happen. It's a solidarity building mechanism. So the Europeans understood this a long time ago. So how do you count then? Well, nobody's unemployed. Well, that's not quite right, is it? There is unemployment, but it doesn't show up as a person with no job. It shows up in reduced hours. So in these countries, they have to make different kinds of calculations. If you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is BLS.gov, and it's a well-designed website the government has, it'll take you, you click on unemployment, it'll take you and it'll show you measures of unemployment where they use the national units, the national measurement in the two different countries, let's say France and the United States, and then they'll state how a different number if you use the American system in France. It would look a little different. They do that. They actually make these measurements. So you can get a lot of the answers to your question. The government has done that work. It's a good statistical place. Yeah?
Concerning the issue of China lending to the US government, you said that China can stop doing that at any moment. But I heard an argument which I don't quite understand, that it's not in China's interest to do that. To stop lending to the
yes,
US.
You're absolutely right. It isn't.
But I don't understand why.
Okay, good. Why would China have no interest in stopping lending? Here's the reason. the Chinese industrial miracle, and it really deserves that name, given the way miracle has been used, say for what Germany did after World War II and so on. The Chinese industrial miracle was based on exports to the United States. Exports to the United States starting in the 1980s and taking off in the 90s and in the first decade of this century. So the question is, to whom did the Chinese export? Overwhelmingly the United States. How did the people of the United States get the money to buy all the stuff from China? What?
You borrowed it from them, from China.
Good. Well, I was about to do this. Give me a moment. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. But let's go step by step. The Americans in 1970, after a century of rising wages, which Americans used to buy more stuff each year, the wage level stopped in the and never resumed. The real wage in the United States today, the average real wage, is about what it was in 1978. We've had 3 decades of no more rising wages in a country that had for 150 years become used to thinking of itself as the promised land to which waves of immigrants come, blah, 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 to have a better life, which they got. This all stops. This is a trauma for the American working class. All the more severe because there was no public discussion of it. Every American family that experiences this didn't experience it as a social change, which is what it was, but they experienced it as a personal failure. You're not making money. You took the wrong courses in college. You went to the wrong college. You're a jerk. You're an idiot. You're incompetent. And what's worse, everybody in the neighborhood knows it because you can't afford to buy the new car. You can't send your kid to school. You can't deliver the American dream. You can't be the parent you defined yourself to be, namely one who gives to the kids a better life than you got. Experienced as a personal failure. Of course Americans went crazy. And one of the expressions of what happens is they kept consumption rising the only way they could when you don't have more wages anymore. You borrowed the money. You borrowed the money. And part, only part, but a big part of the money lent to the American working class came from China. When China earns all that money by shipping the the commodities to us, you know, the socks, the shoes, all of that, they collect those dollars. And as I told you, they're a poor country. They cannot buy from the United States for all kinds of reasons. They're beginning to now, but they couldn't for most of that time. Nothing the United States had that they couldn't eat or want. So what are they going to do with the dollars? They lent them into the United States. Not only was that the best they could do, but it was crucial to do for 2 reasons. One, it was a way of making it possible for Americans to accumulate the debt that would allow them to go to Walmart and buy all that crap. So in a sense, this is, I once wrote an article like this is the Marshall Plan of our time. Remember after the war, the United States put returning soldiers to work by producing stuff we sold to Europe. The Europeans had to rebuild their shattered economies. But what the Europeans didn't have was any money with which to pay for this. So the United States said, solution? We will lend you the money, Marshall Plan, with a rule, a constraint. We will lend you all this money, but you must buy American. So what this was a fancy way of subsidy to American producers. The money was sent to Europe and immediately came back. The Chinese send the money here so that we will buy the goods, which sends the money there, which they lend to us, so we buy the goods. Meanwhile, they're building up their industries because they're selling to us. The other reason the Chinese lent was they didn't want the dollar to depreciate because that would change everything. If they took all those dollars they got and just dumped them in the world currency market, the value of the dollar would go down, and then who knows what they could sell here. This they didn't want to do. So to keep the dollar strong relative to their own currency, this was also called recycling the dollars this way, solved every problem they need, which is why people have said for years, and rightly, that this is a deal between 2 powers that on one level hate each other, but we need that cheap stuff for our working class. They need our working class to buy that cheap stuff because that's how they're developing an industrial powerhouse. And the dollars have to keep moving to keep this game going. But history is littered with examples of countries at each other's throats, enemies, who need each other, until the day comes when one of them decides, I can do better without this relationship, and then it explodes. Can that happen? It always has. But is it true that they need each other? Yes. But that's not a guarantee that it will not destroy. Sir?
When you're talking about the Chinese lending to the American working class, obviously they don't lend directly. I don't get a Chinese dollar to buy a flat screen TV. So
No.
what's the mechanism by which that
There are several.
operates?
One of the favorite things for the Chinese to invest was in, you know, the names of the agencies. They've always been part of our government, but they had a quasi-private status. They are the agencies in charge of enabling our housing market to go. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, you've read about them. They're these government that guarantee mortgages. Well, you ever wonder to yourself, where did they get the money to lend to all the American people for their houses, to buy their houses?